So let me just say hello. I'm Robert Harrison, the director of Another Look book series. And to our longtime members, welcome back. And to all the newcomers who are tuning in today, especially those of you from New York State, thanks for joining us. I'm told we have some members of the New York State Writers Institute with us today. Many thanks to Paul Grandal, who directs that institute, for his promotional support and outreach. Likewise to Paul Slovak, who is William Kennedy's editor at Penguin. And thanks also to William Kennedy himself, whom I gather may be tuning in today from his home in Albany, New York. A few other shout outs before we delve into our discussion. The Donna and Elliot Slade Family Foundation, as well as Stanford's Continuing Studies program, have made today's session possible through their generous financial support. So many thanks to the Slade Foundation and Continuing Studies. Special thanks also to Roger Winkleman, the technical director who runs our webinar and provides us with recordings of the discussions, which we later post online as podcasts or video recordings. And Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute actually puts Roger on loan to us for these events. So I'd like to thank the Freeman Spogli Institute as well. And finally, many thanks as always to Cynthia Haven, the administrative mainstay of Another Look. She always goes beyond the call of duty when it comes to making these meetings happen. And we all owe her a debt of gratitude for her unstinting devotion and dedication to Another Look. Now, a couple of procedural remarks, if I may. We'll be posting an email address in the chat box today. For those of you who are not already on our mailing list, but would like to receive announcements about our future events. So you can take note of that email and send in a little quick note saying I would like to be included on the Another Look email list. Now, regarding today's session, I'll be introducing our two panelists shortly. The three of us are here to discuss William Kennedy's novel, Billy Phelan's Greatest Game, for about 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions from you, the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please do so in the question box, at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I hope you can all see that there's a Q&A box down there at the bottom. So if you'd like to ask a question, just write it into that box. And we have decided to open the chat room to everyone during this session. But if you try to ask a question in the chat box, it's not going to reach us, only the question box. Okay, so that does it for preliminaries. We move on now to this novel, 1978 novel by William Kennedy, Billy Phelan's Greatest Game. It's the second book in Kennedy's Albany cycle, which includes over half a dozen novels set in his native city of Albany. Kennedy, also known as the Bard of Albany, has said, I quote, "Without a sense of place, you don't, as a writer, have very much. Place is all those forces of a given society impinging upon and determining character. Without it, a book becomes bloodless." Well, there's plenty of blood in Billy Phelan's Greatest Game, whose story is based on an actual event, the attempted 1933 kidnapping of John O'Connell Jr., who was the nephew of Albany Democratic boss Daniel P. O'Connell. And to quote our own Tobias Wolff, gives a very nice Aristotelian kind of summary, plot summary as it were. Set during the Depression, the story concerns a young gambler and bookie who suffers a setback that compels him to embark on an odyssey through the demi-monde of his city, during which he encounters temptations and dangers that test his resolve to the limit. There are gangsters, there is a kidnapping, but at its core, this novel is about character and what this man will do and endure to preserve his honor. And to that, I would add that Billy Phelan belongs wholly to the world of Albany during the 1930s. It's a world that has long since vanished, historically speaking, but that lives on in Kennedy's book. And novels have this remarkable power to house worlds and to keep them in being long after history has left them behind. I would even say that novels are world forming. Every novel contains a world, and readers of literature have this great privilege of entering into and inhabiting a great many worlds during their lifetimes. You can see any number of such worlds behind me on the bookshelves. And I've always felt sorry for people who don't read because they are poor in world, whereas those of us gathered here today are rich in world by virtue of the mere fact that we are readers. So today we're going to enter the Albany world of Kennedy's novels with our two discussants. That would be Carol Edgarian and Tobias Wolff. Carol is a newcomer to Another Look. It's her first time participating in a discussion, but she's no stranger to Stanford. She graduated from Stanford in 1984 and went on to become an acclaimed novelist. Her previous books include the international bestseller Rise the Euphrates, published in 1994, and the New York Times bestseller 3 Stages of Amazement, which came out in 2011. And Carol Edgarian's newest book, Vera, published by Scribner, will be out in about 1 week from now, if I'm not mistaken. The world that this new novel invites us into is San Francisco in the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake. So please keep an eye out for Carol's novel, Vera. Carol will be joined today by our own Tobias Wolff, a major American novelist of his generation who needs no introduction here, since he's the founder of this book club, which he directed for 3 years before I took it over. And he has kept our conversation going for almost a decade now. We'll hear from him shortly, but first, I'd like to ask Carol Edgarian to lead off our discussion of the novel. Carol, thank you very much for joining us today. Let me begin by saying that in his introduction to the 2012 Simon & Schuster edition of Billy Phelan in England, the author Dennis Lehane wrote, I quote, "Billy without a city is Billy without a father, because the city transformed into his father when Francis ran off and became a vagrant." I think you might have a few things to say about fathers in Kennedy's novel. Carol, would you like to share some thoughts with us on this topic?
Oh, I'd be happy to. And let me just say, I'm thrilled to be here talking with my dear friend Toby and all of you, and to think that William Kennedy is listening to us. A salute to you for your amazing body of work. And I am a fan. I've taught Ironweed many times and am a great admirer. And I think certainly we can't talk about this book without talking about fathers and sons and all that's entailed, and also Albany. I spent my earliest years in New Britain, Connecticut, also a city with that particular metallic, down on its luck quality, with a hole in the bottom of its boot quality. So this Albany feels like home turf to me, and I think to so many readers, and the way that it comes forward in this book is just amazing. I love the sense of the Greek chorus of the Broadway crowd, the gin joints and the gambling and card dens and the pool rooms we venture in and out of, the restaurants and nightclubs, the two-bit whorehouses, all of that richness that becomes, of course, exactly what you just said, Robert, the setting, the place, the home for the book. And interestingly, I had, in talking about Billy, I had an odd way in. I resisted the novel in the beginning, and sometimes when that happens, it can mean a lot of things. But it, in this case, meant that I fell harder for it the deeper I got in, and the more the magic of it prevailed. we're in the land of myth here, and we're in the land of absent fathers and how their absence plays havoc in the lives of their sons. I think one of the central lines, and there are so many lines in the book that I could pull, but the quest to love yourself is a moral quest. And for Billy and for Martin, as we go through the novel, they're twins, they're twin quests, they're twin journeys, and where those intersect. And the notion there's no Santa Claus and there's no devil, your father is both. And of course, Martin's father is the great writer that he will never be, and Billy's father is Francis, and the ways that these fathers' fates, their denials of their sons, play forward. We of course also have Francis and Gerald, and the ghost of Gerald's death and Francis's guilt of having dropped his infant son and then fleeing. We have Bindi McCall and Charlie Boy. I mean, these names, Charlie, the boys and men, Charlie Boy, Edward and Martin, Billy, and Angie's almost baby. I mean, there's so much we could talk about. I mean, we could talk for hours about this, but also this notion of a warped masculinity. Who are the boys and who are the men, and how do boys without fathers become men? And so much of the story is moment to moment, Billy trying to hold on to his integrity, and what does that mean? And of course, in this complex and nuanced world, everything is every shade. So here you have a gambler, a huckster, who has the moral integrity to carry the novel forward. And so much of the arc of the book, I think we come to see is the arc of Billy's luck. He starts out with great luck. He loses his luck. Of course, along the way, in that opening scene, which Toby would be so fun to talk through, but he's hexed. But who dies in the scene but Scotty, right? Who hexes him. And it's that over and over again of finding his luck, losing his luck. And in the end, is it luck, or is it just integrity that makes Billy rise? And then on the parallel track, and it's interesting how the novel so brilliantly winds its way with Martin, as Martin struggles with the story of Abraham and Isaac, as he struggles to understand his own father and what does that mean, and the horrible dreams he has throughout moment to moment. But in a sense, Martin becomes the good father to Billy, and is the one who does the correct thing and brings Billy back from the wilderness, by writing the piece about him that restores his reputation, or at least lets him carry on, and brings him back in to the underworld, the underbelly of Albany. So there's so much to talk here, about these lines that bring forth, we are only possible as what happened to us yesterday. We all change to move. That line in the book, we're only possible as what happened to us yesterday. And there's so much yesterday in this novel. There's so much behind the novel that's occurred that nobody can undo, that these fathers, these sons can't undo, whether it's the whole world on Colony Street and all that's transpired there, whether it's Francis's sad story, that Francis runs, and who in the end fathers the father, but Billy, who gets him out of jail, who buys him a meal, who takes care of him, and all the ways that Billy takes care of people, whether it is to hit the pimp, the guy who's pimping his sister, or when he helps Daddy Big, or in the decision not to squeal, not to buy into the machine's sense of what is right and wrong, but to determine his own sense of right or wrong. And then, of course, and Toby, maybe this is a place where I hand the baton to you, but so much of the humor of this world, so much of the joy and the incredible audacity that is brought forward. I mean, I could pull 100 lines, but in thinking about Billy, no man who wore socks in Albany felt better in the nighttime than Billy. No man who wore socks in Albany. I mean, it's these incredible thumbnail characterizations throughout. Like the brilliance of how to bring forward a complete world in half a line. I'm seeing you nod, Toby, but I mean, just over and over. I want to pass the ball to you in some way that, whether it's the mystical, the hexing, Abraham and Isaac. Why don't I toss it to you and we can kick it back and forth? But I just, it's a book about talk. I mean, once I realized that it's not about, we're not going to see the kidnapping take place. We're going to hear it piece by piece by piece as these men talk, as they talk it through. And it's through conversation that they come to know things. It's through conversation that betrayals and alliances get made and unmade. It's a story of talk, and I love that it's a story of male talk. And maybe why don't I pass it to you, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, it is we have all spoken about this world as if it were a world, a real world, these real people. And I have to remind myself in reading it and talking about it now that this is made of language. What we have turned this language into a world in our minds because he's enabled us to do that. Yep. And the tone that he captures in the dialogue. So much of the dialogue, it feels like it was like written on a trench coat. It's just got that quality to it, bitten and hard bitten, and at the same time poetic. It's got a kind of poetry of the streets, the dialogue. It's rhythmic as you read through it. I was tempted almost to read a lot of those sections aloud to myself. There's a kind of call and response feeling in the dialogue. But to get back to this idea of a novel as a world, which you have both touched on, this is a densely realized world. As you say, it is mythic. I think, obviously, though some people would not want to think of this as a myth, but Abraham and Isaac has a mythic quality. But I'm also thinking of Odysseus's attempt to journey home through all these trials that he has set along the way, to reclaim his birthright at the end of that journey. And even more, I think of Orpheus descending into the underworld after the thing that he loves best, that is most important to him, in that case, Eurydice, the thing that is most important to Billy Phelan is that he pays his debts. That is a kind of refrain in his life. He wants to be different from those others around him in that way. He pays his debts. And so he journeys into this underworld, which takes on a kind of mythic quality as real as it is, as realistically as it is portrayed, because he is going to bring something back. He is going to redeem something that is of all things most precious to him, and that is his honor. And every card he plays, every rack of balls he runs in the pool hall is all aimed in that direction. That is what he is doing. We see Martin in his own way doing the same thing. His temptation would be, of course, to get the biggest scoop ever and run this story. But he knows that by doing this, he would put Charlie Boy's life in danger. So that is a temptation he resists in making his own venture into this underworld. And as I say, it's so densely realized with these gamblers, Martin's father's old mistress, Angie up there. I loved the description of Angie. She was married, but only dabbled in it. So yes, I also had felt as if I had a certain connection to this place, as you described your own, Carol. I lived for almost 20 years in Syracuse and went over to Albany often. And indeed, I had the great pleasure of meeting Bill Kennedy a couple of times, and we had dinner in this wonderful Italian place that he liked to go to. And I met him after I had read these novels and fallen in love with them. But there was something about Syracuse. It had that same ingrown quality, if you will. There was a very strong American Irish community in Syracuse, concentrated on the west side of Syracuse. I got to know a lot of those people. Some of this felt very familiar to me, as I also have a strong connection to the American Irish community in San Francisco. And there's a recognition that I feel, a connection to this, to the people in this novel. But it is a world. It is a world as well realized, as complex as, say, Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha County, or John Cheever's Shady Hill, Winesburg, Ohio. He's really, you don't just describe a place as a novelist, you really have to create it. It in the end floats free of the inspirational material and becomes its own place. And the Albany of William Kennedy's novels is its own place, and obviously draws its sparks from experience and history, but it has to be on its own, and it is, I think, beautifully here. The other thing I really love about this novel is the structure. There's so many lines of tension here. Martin trying, in a sense, to claim his birthright and assert himself. He is not, as his father once advised him, a loser. And obviously Billy, as I've just described, trying to assert his own integrity, to redeem it. So, this whole question of fathers and sons does indeed become very, very important. And I loved that passage that you quoted, Robert, at the beginning, that in the absence of Francis, Albany, the city, has become Billy's father, and it has that feeling as we go through it. But the writing in it is just wonderful too, just so vivid, just clear as a bell. The narrative arc is complex and immediately creates tension with this kidnapping. Well, first of all, that of course the bowling, the bowling match with its almost kind of serio-comical ending with Scotty dying of a heart attack on the floor, and going on from there. But we realize, thinking about the title, Billy Phelan's Greatest Game, it isn't the bowling match that he won. It is the great adventure that he embarks on to bring himself back whole that night from the underworld. So there's the kidnapping, and then there's that other quest of people's holding on to their own honor, Martin and Billy. Robert, what were some of the things that you were thinking about it?
Yeah, well, I have several thoughts. First, some thoughts inspired by both of your comments. What Carol said about talk, I think, connects with what I took to be one of the prime virtues of the novel, which is the dialogue. Dialogue is, as you know, both of you, is a very challenging thing to write a dialogue that doesn't hit false notes. And it's I was very taken with the way I was drawn into the let's say the medium or the currency with which people spoke to each other in Albany at that time under these circumstances. So that and I thought that the dialogue for me took the place of plot in many ways, because I don't think this is a novel that's plot driven.
Yeah.
It's not particularly dramatic, of course, the reader has curiosity about whether Charlie Boy is going to make it or not, but it's not constructed in such a way that the denouement is that he's, saved and rescued at the last minute. It's almost foregone conclusion that something like that is going to end up. So to write a novel that is not plot driven, I think requires a lot of creativity on other aspects of it. The other thing I would mention about the world that, as you say, Tobias, created. Novelists don't just represent; they form worlds and they create them. But there is something about Albany, the historical Albany, that's very persuasive, because it's not only in the city of Albany, but for me, the bar is such a major protagonist here. And the bar is a world, and it is the public sphere par excellence of this city for at least this cast of characters. And you find that the bar is not just the place where you go to drink, where you go to eat, but it's also a place of entertainment. It's a place of the games. It's a place of making deals. It's the whole world kind of. It's a center of gravity for the world of Albany. So, and the pandemic has shown us how many people suffer enormous privation by the closure of the bars. And so as soon as they had loosened up some restrictions, the first thing that happened was all these bars were kind of filled up. But I have a feeling that the bars today don't have the same kind of vibrancy in many places as they used to have for that world. But since I don't want to make it just a love fest for, the
Right.
novel, so let me, ask some questions that about honor, for example. So Billy is clearly someone who has his own code of honor. He has his own sense of what is right and wrong, but at the same time, I was not particularly impressed with a kind of ideal hero when he has some sins on in his own behavior. When he hits, Carol said when he hits the pimp, well, that's a murder in a sense. That those three guys murder the pimp. Now, the fact that he was pimping his sister is, it's morally objectionable, but it does not by any means detract from what amounts to, a kind of one-sided assault on this person. And then you have to think even of the horrors that are left behind without, their pimp and their protector. So Billy is a hustler. He sets people up to lose. Even the very opening scene about the bowling, we have someone who has a heart attack there, or some kind of, he kind of goes to his death. So he's definitely a hero. But he's not an anti-hero, but he's a very weird kind of hero from the moral point of view. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah. Well, the whole conversation with Angie about her fictional pregnancy he certainly does not bring himself off with, he's complicated in his response to that.
Yeah.
Well, and it is a book of codes, isn't it? I mean, we haven't really talked about all the, there's the code of the McCalls. There's the code within a bar, within the bars, code of conduct, who has the inside code. It's also a world, let us say, where women are often the margins. They're hookers, mistresses, weary wives. But but the women also have their own code. I mean, you mentioned Angie, but you think, also Annie, who never gives away her code and protectiveness for her kids, where she never tells them that Francis dropped the baby. What is that code? Talk about integrity. Talk about who is carrying, who is the real protector in the novel. But when you talk, the code of the streets, the code within that one card game, when the kid walks in. I mean, that's one of my favorite scenes in the novel, because it's so complete and complex. I mean, you can see around the table, you can see when the kid comes in with the pistol and what everybody's doing, and that Billy decides it's not correct that this kid should be able to take the dough, and risks everything. And moment to moment, everybody's calculating. Am I gonna, who's up, who's down, what's right, what's wrong? And then, of course, like divvying up the pot becomes its own moral question of who's entitled to the dough.
Yep.
Right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. One of them had folded his cards, so it was determined that he really didn't get a cut.
He really doesn't get the cut.
Right. It did. And the novel actually begins with that matter of codes.
Right.
When Scotty says to Billy at a certain moment toward the end of that game, he said, have you ever rolled a perfect game before? And Billy says, I haven't done it here yet. But he hexed him with the question, and he knew he was, and everybody knew he had by asking that question. You don't talk about a perfect game when it's in progress. You know it curses it. He did it. Everybody reacted to it as if he had, maligned his mother. And that's absolutely true. And the whole question about not being a snitch. They want him to get next to Maury Berman because and watch him and report back Billy because he might know where Charlie boy who took him, that sort of thing. And he doesn't like that idea. That's another aspect of this,
Right.
of this all-encompassing code. Yeah. Now, Carol, you when I was you and I had a brief conversation about the book. I mean, like 10 seconds last night when we were setting up, the time for today and everything. And you said, this is not a perfect book, and it has a problem. It has problems. I'd be curious to hear you elaborate a little more on those.
Well, I think, and I think, Robert, you touched on it. I think, the beginning of novels always teach us how to read the novel, and I think we either come under the spell or we don't. And I as I've said, I've loved so much of Kennedy's work, and this book I resisted in the beginning. I actually had to begin it a few times. In order to just like, what am I missing? What am I missing? And in that first chapter, if you think about how much the game takes up, and then the kidnapping is off stage. We don't see the kidnapping. That's a deliberate choice, right? But it's really like two graphs of exposition. We're told what happens, right? And we don't ever see it. So when I read that, I thought, okay. So to your point, Robert, we're not following traditional plot. We're following something else. We're following the moment to moment movement, byplay, who's up, who's down in this greater world. It's not jockeying so much. It's more like nuance, friendship, not friendship. Nobody's actually a friend. There's moments when people, when Billy's asked, is Maury your friend? And he won't say he's his friend, but he doesn't hate him. He just bought me a steak kind of thing. Right. So I guess he's okay. He bought me a steak. Right. So I was looking for those moments because thinking about Ironweed, I mean, there's every scene is a symphony. Every scene has that lyrical quality and mythic sense of completion, moment to moment to moment. And you're carrying so much of that sorrow through the book, where in Billy, I felt, and I'd love to know what you guys felt, but as a reader, I didn't engage on that level. What we're watching is that each of these characters is carrying that. So it's how that causes them to act or not act or talk. It's different. It's not up front with the reader. It's constantly pulling at the characters. What do you think about that, Toby?
I was well. One thing you mentioned here, Carol, is that we don't see the kidnapping, and I thought that was a really, really interesting choice of Kennedy in doing that, because it would have changed the character of the novel. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really admire about it is the kind of resolute focus the novel has on this journey through the night, and We know this other thing that's going on around it. It, in a sense, surrounds the novel and gives it a kind of tension. But, like the murder of Agamemnon, it takes place off stage.
Yep.
Don't really need to see it. And though we know he's in mortal danger, Charlie Boy, his release is kind of anticlimactic. They let him go in a cabin somewhere. Yep. And because they got paid, and even the that almost offhand way in which he talks about the kidnappers getting shot in Newark, right? And some just stupidly in a gun battle in Newark. It's just dropped in a couple of sentences. And so he's giving up those kind of conventional narrative suspenseful devices for this social picture and the portrait, the interior portrait of Billy and Martin in particular. If there was one thing that perhaps I could have used just a little less of in taking us through the night, through this demi-monde of Albany, after a while, the characters start to pile up quite a bit. And we go from one to another to another to another as he makes his progress through. And each of them, as you meet them, is interesting and arresting. And maybe that is as it should be, because he can't hold on to all of those. He's making a progress, but at certain points I would have been fine to have him just linger a little longer with some of these people and along the way, instead of these quick snapshots and then the next person. But I must say this is one of my favorite of the Albany novels. It's so coherent. I love the structure of it, and there's you feel like there's something at stake in it.
Well, maybe I can ask whether you say that it's a fully realized novel for what it sets out to do, and in what struck me was the character of Martin, who seems to me to have a lot of potential that remains unrealized as a character. I don't know how to put this except to say that he seems to have a literary sensibility and a certain kind of allegiance to maybe a republic of letters that has very little to do with the demi-monde that the novel plunges us into. And, at the beginning, I was like Carol, I was finding it very difficult to relate to any of these characters because I grew up in a very different kind of world than the one under description. So, but Martin, at least, I had a sense that I was going to be able to latch onto him because he was a writer. He knew who Henry James was. He's someone who seemed to have a certain kind of subtle human psychology when it came to the people that he's involved with and related to, women as well as guys. And yet he seems to get sucked into the darker side of the night. And he then seems to fall in line with the ruffian side of thing. He pees on the pimp's feet during the assault, for example, and we get little sparks and snippets of his this other side of him, which is one that I would have, as a reader, I would have been carried along much more willingly had that side of his character become a conduit throughout the whole narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think another way of what you're saying is it's a very disciplined book to Toby, to your point too. I mean, the focus is very concise as much as it's about talk. I mean, that actually is a contradictory statement, but Martin's focus is very much an arc within the book, and it stays pretty narrow. He's working. What does he do right after the bowling match? Is he goes to see his father, and that's always the touchstone. It begins and ends there with the father, and right. What is he trying to work out there?
The other thing that you were mentioning, Carol, earlier is that you had a sense that there's no real friendships. There's just particular sort of not contractual relations, but some other relations. And we have actually, I think there's someone who sent us a query, Maureen Gracious, where the code of, that there's a heroism to Billy's maintaining the Demi-Mond's code of not being a rat, but what do you make of his choice of not betraying Maury while withholding information that would aid in finding and saving Charlie, his boyhood friend? And there the suspicion arises in my mind that Maury is a guy who was what's they call sponsoring him during the bowling match, whereas the McCall, it was at that particular moment, he was pitted against the McCalls during the bowling thing. And that maybe for that reason, he felt like he owed one to Maury, not because he's a big friend of his, but just because it was circumstantial. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, moment to moment, I mean, these are also survivalists in some way, certainly Billy, so I mean, when you think about his relationship to Charlie Boy, I mean, they grew up together.
Yeah.
Right. So they go deep, and there's that feeling, and that is part of Kennedy's brilliance. I mean, you come across a line where, we grew up together, and you're so in the world that you feel that all the way down to the bottom of being kids together and running into each other, and what school there was. There's no school in any of this. Has anybody ever cracked a book in this world? Well, Martin's father and Martin, but yet moment to moment, you're on your own. You're living by your wits, and certainly for Billy, that's true.
So we have some questions. I don't know if would you like to take some questions for you all?
Sure, why don't we?
Yeah. So, and this is a question that I had myself, which is, what was Billy's greatest game? What does it really refer to? Is it finessing his way through the kidnapping without being a stool pigeon, or is it an actual real game, or what?
Well, I think he's playing with the title against our temptation to think that this great game that begins the novel of him getting $2.99, and I love it when he tells a friend of his, "Yeah, I got $2.99." Guy immediately says, "Which pen was left standing?" Right?
The 4-pin.
The 4-pin. Exactly. He knew he had the answer. There's a kind of glinting humor of that kind throughout the novel. I mean, even the name of the play that Martin's father wrote, "The Flaming Corsage." How can you read that without laughing?
I know.
And you kind of know exactly how bad a play
it was.
Just from the title. I'm sorry, I lost the thread. What were we talking?
What was his greatest game? I think his greatest game is keeping his integrity, right? Isn't that and I love at the end that he's magic again. I mean, something we haven't mentioned is the whole story of who's magical. What's, in this dark night of Albany, there's a lot of lift, there's a lot of magic and he is magic again for whatever, until the next day.
Until the next day, yeah.
You certainly expect after that $2.99 that there's going to be a greater game somewhere further on in the novel, but it's a false expectation.
Well, I think it's the series of things that he overcomes in the course of his night in order to pay Martin off, I mean, and pay his debt. I thought that was what was the game that was playing off against the bowling game at the beginning.
Great. So we have two questions related to the same issue, which is like the number of proper names in the book is unusual. You have characters, streets, bars, restaurants, and pool halls. Beyond remembering, how do all these names add enough to the book to make them worthwhile? And I will also, that comes from Ted Haynes, and from Catherine Hugg, we have the question, why so many names of persons who are never developed beyond their names and occupations?
Yeah.
Is it just to give local color? I mean, you sounded quite enchanted with all these names, Carol, in your opening remarks.
I think the names are part, they're the diction of the book. The names are placeholders. They're also explosions. They're so evocative, and they're sort of, I also had trouble following some of the less developed characters and thinking, as readers, we want to be smart. So you come across character after character and you think, okay, do I need to know who this is so I can carry them forward? And if you're thinking that too much, then you're stepping outside. So, but once I sort of got the sense, okay, a lot of this is it's just part of it's another building in Albany. It's one more part of the character of the book.
Yeah.
Is that, Toby, is that your hit too?
No, it is. We have to remember that we're seeing this through the eyes of Billy and occasionally Martin, and that's how he's seeing these people. That's so and so, and he goes on to the next one, and that's so and so, and he each of them sparks a moment of recognition and remembrance, something about them, and it moves on to the next. The way in which he moves through the city and sees these faces and these people kind of reenacts his own sensory, impressionistic progress through the city. The novel can't afford to have him stop and dwell on each of these, but it gives a picture. It's like those pictures of Moulin Rouge and Toulouse-Lautrec's paintings with these blobs of faces out there in the club. They're out there. They give color and texture to the world that the painter is creating, and at the same time, not each one needs to be drawn in absolute detail. Yeah, they're very textural. They give a sense of the kind of fabric of the city, and
yeah,
they're impressionistic almost. Pointillist almost, the way.
Question that comes from Daniel Roebuck. It's, what does the novel say about the media and journalism in particular? And because that's another strain, which is so if there's the world of the bar, there's also the world of the the press room and the codes, as Carol was saying, because these journalists operate according to a code that we lament these days, because of all these codes have since then been thrown out the window for the most part. But and some of the best venues struggle to hold on to them. But nevertheless, it seems that Martin is deeply embedded in this world of American journalism, newspaper reporting and writing, and the kind of importance and weight that an opinion piece can have when he writes about Billy, and kind of restores his standing in the community. Do you have any thoughts about that, either of you?
Well,
so go ahead, Toby. Go ahead.
obviously the great tension in for Martin is, and for those at the paper, is that, as one of them says, since when do we withhold a story, you know, like this? It would be this would sell a lot of newspapers. The chief would not like this if we withhold this story, and it's and yet their reason for doing so and trying to get other outlets to also sit on the story is to protect the life of the abducted Charlie boy. And those two values come into conflict here. It's the reporters, the newspapermen see it as their job to get that story out. And that they think of that as their responsibility. They don't like this business of that being muzzled. It's for them, it's a violation of their code. But there is another consideration that challenges that code, and they are obviously in tension.
Carol?
Yeah, no, I agree. I also have to say that it was interesting to that point of folks protecting Charlie boy. I mean, back to this notion that we don't see Charlie boy abducted, and even the abduction. I mean, he's asleep in his car, right, and gets snatched. But also quickly how he becomes sort of the object for everybody's desire, whether he's going to be protected, whether he's not going to be protected. He quickly becomes sort of objectified. And that's certainly an aspect of what we see in today's media, right? And today's world. There's the event, and then there's all the different ways that everybody holds the event. And the person gets kind of lost in that.
All right. Well, we're nearing the end of our hour, so I'd like to read something that Carol Hansen said, that you've done such a good job with the discussion. It makes me want to read the book again. And that's really always, the best criterion to apply about what, the instilling a desire to read again, because that's what novels are intended to be reread even more than read, no? So would you like to have some concluding thoughts, Toby and Carol? Is there something about the style that in which the novel is written that you personally, as a writer and an author, identify with, or just admire from afar, or is it? Do you feel that this is part of your own formation as an American author?
Carol?
I love a book that takes me to a world I don't know and completely immerses me, takes me on that kind of ride. And every one of William Kennedy's books do that. And we see in Albany, I mean, it just sort of points to the sense of a writer's garden and, Albany, but there's so much, each of these books digs deeper and deeper in the same garden and reveals something new. And that is just stunning and an amazement. And I agree. I think that's a beautiful place to leave off in wanting to go back and reread and to mine, even if there's resistance. Even if you feel initially a resistance to a story, these are the kinds of books that have so much to offer. It's interesting to be in conversation even with the initial resistance. Toby, what do you think?
No, I love these Albany novels of William Kennedy's, and when I think of Billy's passage through the night, I I think of those lines from the Eliot's Four Quartets. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And that describes in some ways for me something that happens in the course of this novel.
That's very well said. We couldn't end on a more eloquent note than that. So I'd like to thank both Carol Edgarian, Tobias Wolff, Roger Winkleman, Cynthia Haven, and the very near 200 people who joined us for this discussion of Billy Phelan. So thanks to you all. And please, if you have another minute to send an email or put something in the chat, if you want to be on our mailing list, please do that before we sign out. And we look forward to hearing more from the two of you, Carol and Toby, in future installments of Another Look. So
thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you.
take care.
Take care.